Every crime hides a story, and every story leaves a trace.
It was in the sullen November of 1890 that the case which came to be known in certain discreet circles as the witness who changed his name first began to stir in the undercurrents of London's criminal world. The wind swept low over Baker Street that afternoon, bringing with it a fine sleet that hissed against the windows and blurred the silhouettes of gas lamps beyond. I was seated across from Holmes, who, with one languid leg flung over the arm of his chair, was focused with unwavering attention on a smear of ash upon his left cuff. An irregular grey marking, he had insisted, came not from his pipe, but from an envelope handled by a man recently arrived from Constantinople. We were interrupted, not by a knock, but by the hasty, half-panicked scraping of boots across our doorstep, followed a moment later by the abrupt appearance of Inspector Tobias Gregson, his cheeks flushed from the cold and his eyes shining with urgency. "Holmes," he began breathlessly, "we've got a matter that's beyond any of us at the Yard. It's not the crime, you understand. It's the circumstances. There's something off." Holmes did not rise. "The number of things in London which are off, Inspector, could fill a sizable library. Be more precise." Gregson removed his hat, revealing a damp lock of sandy hair. "It's the matter of Mr. Elric Nabberley." "Nabberley," Holmes repeated softly. "The name strikes no chord." "It wouldn't. He changed it. That's the point." "Ah," Holmes said, steepling his fingers. "Do sit down, Gregson, and tell me why a man's decision to alter his appellation warrants a personal visit from Scotland Yard." "Because the name he gave us, Elric Nabberley, was the name under which he testified last week in the trial of Alfred Barstow. The testimony sealed the conviction. Barstow goes to the noose in 6 days." Holmes's eyes flashed open. "And you suspect the witness, this Nabberley, lied?" "Not just lied, disappeared, and now his real identity is in question, and—" Gregson hesitated, lowering his voice. "We found him this morning, dead." That word punctured the air like a shot. Holmes sat upright now, his languor vanished. "Dead how?" "Slit throat, in his lodgings near King's Cross. Quiet place, no witnesses, no sign of forced entry. But here's the devil of it. We now believe the man we knew as Elric Nabberley may never have existed at all, not before a month ago, and Holmes, his body had no papers, no personal items, no letters, not even a laundry mark." "A man who erases himself," Holmes murmured. "Fascinating," I interjected, still struggling to grasp the connection. "But surely if the man perjured himself, then Barstow's case must be reopened." "That's the trouble," Gregson said grimly. "We've begun to suspect the testimony was correct. The facts matched too precisely. But if he told the truth, then why the false name? Why vanish afterward? Why— Would someone murder a truthful witness?" Holmes finished. "Indeed, a paradox, and all the more engaging for it. Tell me everything." Gregson removed a damp envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to Holmes. "Preliminary report. There's also this. Was found in the fireplace grate of his room, half burnt. You may do more with it than our lab could." Holmes turned the scorched scrap over with tweezers he produced from his dressing-gown pocket. I leaned closer and saw only the fragment of a sentence. "Not the first time they've done this. I will do what is right, even if it costs me my—" "The word life would have been fitting here," Holmes said softly. He rose suddenly and began pacing. "This case has a rhythm, Watson, a rhythm that tugs at something familiar." He turned to Gregson. "I must visit the scene at once. Watson, coat and revolver. I believe we are about to step into a hall of mirrors where even the truth wears a mask." With that, Holmes swept his violin aside from the mantelpiece, donned his Inverness cape, and we followed Gregson into the sleet-drenched streets, where a man's name had become the key to either justice or its complete undoing. The fog thickened as we approached King's Cross, curling around the iron railings and smothering the gas lamps in a dull yellow haze. Gregson led the way, his boots slapping against the wet cobbles, while Holmes moved with feline purpose, every step of his long stride filled with suppressed energy. I followed close behind, revolver in one pocket and notebook in the other, though I was beginning to suspect that neither would be of use in a case where identity itself had slipped into vapor. We arrived at a narrow street of dilapidated boarding houses, the sort where occupants came and went with no questions asked and no names remembered. Gregson paused before number 43, a squat brownstone with peeling paint and a door hanging slightly ajar. A constable nodded to us and stepped aside. Holmes entered first, and I saw his gaze sweep the cramped entryway like a lantern beam. He said nothing. The murdered man's room was on the 3rd floor. It was small and unremarkable. Bare walls, a narrow bed, a plain desk with a single drawer that had been forced open, leaving a ragged splinter of wood clinging to the frame. The fireplace was cold. Ashes still sat in the grate, grey and white, lightly disturbed. The room stank faintly of paraffin. Holmes circled slowly, his fingers clasped behind his back. His attention lingered on the rug, which was askew by a fraction of an inch. He knelt and ran his fingers lightly along the wooden floorboards, sniffing at a faint discoloration. "Oil," he murmured. "From a lantern, perhaps, or a cleaning agent. Someone attempted to erase their presence, but only partially. Watson, examine that ash heap. Tell me what you see." I stepped forward and crouched near the hearth. Mixed among the ordinary coal residue were faint remnants of burnt paper, the edges curling inward like petals of blackened silk. Something caught the light, a melted bead of wax. "Sealing wax," I said. "Red. Likely used on the letter fragment you examined earlier." Holmes nodded, then turned to the door. "Gregson, you say there were no papers on the body?" "Nothing at all?" "None. His pockets were empty. No laundry tag, no tailor's label, even the maker's mark on his boots was scraped off." "Which tells us 2 things, Holmes said. "First, the man knew he would be scrutinized. Second, someone else knew enough to finish what he began, or undo what he had intended." He turned abruptly and opened the desk drawer. Within it lay only a smudge of graphite and a jagged edge of torn paper. Holmes held the scrap to the light and exhaled sharply through his nose. "From a ledger," he said, "ruled in double columns. Watson, note the tear. It's clean, deliberate. This wasn't done in haste." Gregson frowned. "But what does it tell us?" Holmes did not answer. He had moved to the bed, where he gently lifted the pillow and sniffed it, then parted the sheets. A soft clink sounded. Metal striking metal. Holmes extracted a cufflink from the fold of the blanket, narrow and gold, with a tiny blue insignia embedded in its face. A lion passant guardant. Curious. A family crest, perhaps. "You see, Watson? Not everything was removed." I studied it closely. Could the killer have overlooked it? Holmes slipped the cufflink into a leather pouch. Perhaps. But I believe this was left. Not dropped. A knock at the door interrupted us. Another constable entered, hat in hand. "Message for you, Inspector," he said, handing Gregson a folded telegram. The inspector opened it and frowned. "From the courts," he said, glancing up. "They've received an anonymous tip. Says Barstow, the condemned man, is innocent. That the witness who testified against him had been bought." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Convenient timing." "Could be a crank," Gregson said. "We get dozens of false tips after a conviction. Sympathy ploys." Holmes took the telegram from Gregson's hand and studied it. No signature, no location, yet the language is precise. Bought rather than coerced or mistaken. Someone wants to suggest corruption, not error. He paced for a moment, then stopped at the window and stared into the swirling fog. "There is someone behind this," he said at last, "a person of careful calculation and reach." They want Barstow freed, but not vindicated. They plant doubts, then remove the witness to muddy the waters. The only question is, who benefits? Barstow, I said. If he's innocent, perhaps. Or perhaps he was merely a pawn. I shall need the court transcripts of Barstow's trial, Gregson, every word of Naberley's testimony, and we must identify this crest. He tapped the pouch. I suspect we are not dealing with a common thug. Gregson nodded. I'll have the transcripts delivered by morning. Also, Holmes added, place a discreet inquiry to the College of Heralds. This crest may belong to a minor house, one not frequently cited. We descended the stairs shortly after. As we stepped back into the street, Holmes paused by the front stoop and crouched. His fingers brushed the edge of the stone slab. Boot print, he muttered. Light but recent. Someone waited here, Watson. Possibly a lookout. Note the flat arch. Military standard issue, and judging by the spacing, I would wager a man of about 5'8", moderate build. Left a few minutes before we arrived. Gregson paled slightly. You think he was watching the room? I think someone has been keeping track of who comes and goes from this place, and when the man who called himself Elric Naberley no longer served his purpose, they ensured he could not serve anyone else's. As we walked back toward Baker Street, the wind rising against our collars, Holmes spoke only once more. This is no longer a question of who he was, Watson. The question is, who wanted him not to be? And with that, he fell into a long and brooding silence, his face a mask of abstracted thought as the shadows of London lengthened around us. We returned to Baker Street long past dark, the fog having thickened to a silvery pall that rendered even the familiar outline of Mrs. Hudson's stoop a blurred suggestion. Holmes was more silent than usual on our journey home, his steps neither rushed nor meandering, but steady, as if each footfall served as a metronome to the thoughts rapidly assembling in his mind. The hearth was already lit when we stepped inside, its warmth a small comfort against the cold damp of the evening. Holmes discarded his coat without ceremony and went straight to his desk, where he spread out the charred letter fragment, the telegram, and the gold cufflink in precise alignment. I poured us each a brandy and settled into the armchair across from him, notebook in hand, waiting for him to speak. This case, he said after a long silence, has the distinct scent of orchestration. Naberley, or whoever he was not merely a random witness. He was selected, placed, and then removed. Everything suggests manipulation at the level of design. But if that is the case, I asked, then why involve him at all? Why not allow Barstow to be convicted on circumstantial grounds or by another witness less likely to draw scrutiny? Holmes leaned back, fingertips pressed beneath his chin. Because there are truths that must be told to give lies the ring of honesty. Naberley's testimony may have been partly true, just true enough to convict. But what if it also concealed a deeper narrative, one that implicates someone beyond Barstow? You think he was made to testify with the intention of later being silenced? I think, Holmes replied evenly, that he was a conduit, and once the current passed through him, he became unnecessary, possibly dangerous. There came a knock at the door, and Mrs. Hudson entered bearing a small parcel, her expression pinched with curiosity. Delivered by hand, Mr. Holmes. Just now. No name, only that it was to be placed into your hands directly. Holmes accepted the package and turned it over with care. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, sealed not with string but with a spot of sealing wax. Red, like that in the fireplace grate. His eyes narrowed. With a slender letter opener, he slit the wrapping. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded thrice, and a small photographic carte de visite, the kind popular in fashionable circles years ago. Holmes unfolded the note first and read it aloud. You were never meant to see the whole picture, Mr. Holmes. Leave the pieces scattered and forget the name Naberley. There are tides greater than justice, and those who stand in their way drown quietly. He said nothing for a moment, then lifted the photograph to the light. It showed a younger man in formal evening dress, sleek hair, fine features, and a gaze so self-assured it bordered on arrogance. Beneath it was an inscription written in a careful, looping hand. To A.N. from your ever-faithful L.M. I leaned forward. Could that be our Nabile? Holmes compared it silently to the memory of the corpse we had seen. Then, nodding slowly, he said, "It is him." Younger, perhaps by 5 years. The eyes are unmistakable. He placed both items down and turned toward me. "Watson, the initials L.M., does that stir anything? Anything from the social pages or the theater reports?" I frowned, racking my memory. There was a Leopold Marchand, minor nobility turned art patron. He hosted salons in Belgravia, rumored to have questionable associations. Vanished abroad in 1886, if I recall correctly. Precisely the sort of shadowed associate one might expect for a man like Nabile, assuming they shared secrets worth dying for. The rest of the evening was spent in quiet intensity. Holmes wrote 3 telegrams, one to the College of Heralds regarding the crest, another to a theatre acquaintance for any recent sightings of Elric Nabile under different aliases, and a third to Mycroft. That last was worded with remarkable restraint, but I noted it bore the undercurrent of tension Holmes reserved only for matters involving government entanglement. By morning, a knock at the door heralded the arrival of a young messenger bearing the court transcript from Barstow's trial. Holmes received it with unfeigned interest and spent the better part of 2 hours poring over the typed sheets with surgical precision. He testified, Holmes murmured, that he saw Barstow enter the alley behind Davenant House at precisely 10 minutes to 9 on the Ijoire night of March 14th. He claimed to have followed him due to a suspicion and then witnessed the altercation that resulted in the victim's death. But he gave no reason for that suspicion. None, and neither the defense nor prosecution pressed the matter. Holmes closed the file gently and sat back. That omission is not just an oversight. It's a gap deliberately left unfilled, because the answer would have raised more questions. A sharp rap at the door interrupted us again, and this time it was Gregson, visibly winded, his face tight with urgency. "We've just received word," he said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation, "that Barstow was attacked in his cell early this morning, slashed across the abdomen. He's alive, but just barely." Holmes stood at once. "Not suicide?" Number guard was nearby. He heard the struggle, caught a glimpse of someone fleeing, described only as a small figure in a grey overcoat. No face, no trace. Gone like smoke. Holmes turned to me, his features grim. "They want him silenced. The web tightens." "I've already called for added security," Gregson said. "But Holmes, what if there's more? What if the same hand that struck Nabile now moves within the yard?" Holmes said nothing, but a flicker of something cold passed through his gaze. He retrieved the photograph once more and stared at it. "We are circling a name," he murmured. "A name not yet spoken in courtrooms or police reports, but it is the name the dead man carried to his grave." He looked up sharply. "Gregson, I need a list of all court witnesses vetted in the Barstow case, every single one, regardless of whether they testified, and see if any were vouched for by third parties who remain unnamed." Gregson gave a quick nod and departed, and as the door shut behind him, Holmes returned to the fire and stood staring into the flames. "We are on a threshold, Watson. The witness changed his name, but not to hide from justice. He changed it to warn us. And someone else has gone to great lengths to ensure we never discover what he was running from." I was about to respond when a sharp peal of the front bell interrupted. Mrs. Hudson's voice followed, hesitant and tight. "Mr. Holmes, a gentleman is here to see you. He says he was a friend of Mr. Nabile." Holmes turned slowly. "Show him up." And as the footsteps echoed on the stair, the air in the room seemed to still, like a theatre breathlessly awaiting the entrance of its next player. The man who entered 221B Baker Street was unlike the figures who typically pass through our sitting room. Tall, lean, and impeccably dressed, he carried himself with the subdued elegance of someone who understood the nuances of power and the value of remaining just beneath notice. His overcoat, though modest in design, was tailored to perfection, and a thin line of frost still clung to his dark hair from the morning mist. He removed his gloves with slow deliberation, his eyes not yet meeting Holmes's, but sweeping the room with quiet calculation. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, voice smooth but distant, "I come at considerable risk and without official sanction, but I believe you are the only person who may prevent a second injustice from being committed." Holmes, who had not risen from his chair, studied the man with keen detachment. "You claim acquaintance with the man calling himself Elric Nabberley." "I do, though that was not his true name. I knew him as Alan Merton." At this, Holmes flicked a glance at the photograph still lying atop the sealed telegram. "L.M.," he murmured. "I presume the dedication was yours." The man inclined his head but said nothing. "Then speak plainly," Holmes continued. "Who was he? And why has he died in another man's name under circumstances designed to erase both his past and his intentions?" "My name is Simon Drelincourt," the man said, stepping forward now. "I am, or was, a confidential attaché to the Home Office. My position required discretion. Alain, your Nabberley, was once an interpreter stationed in the Levant, a brilliant linguist with a singular memory and a penchant for misplaced loyalties." Watson set down his pen, eyes narrowing. "Espionage?" "Unofficially, yes. He was never formally acknowledged. His work, his very identity, was deliberately buried following an incident in Constantinople in '87. A man he translated for, an agent of ours, was betrayed. Alain claimed it was not by his doing, but there were those who disagreed." Holmes's tone was neutral. "And what brought him back to London?" "Guilt and fear. He believed a certain individual had resurfaced, someone he had once overheard during a covert assignment, a man whose name we still cannot trace, but whose influence we feel across half a dozen compromised cases." Holmes's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. "And how does this connect to Alfred Barstow's trial?" Drelincourt hesitated, his composure faltering for the first time. Alain recognized the victim in the Barstow case, Sir Cedric Vale, as a man he'd seen in Cairo years before, attending an illicit auction of intercepted diplomatic correspondence. He claimed Vale was no innocent victim, but an operator in his own right. Blackmail, smuggling, foreign contracts. He testified that Barstow killed Vale during a street robbery. Because that was the truth, on the surface. But Alain believed that Vale was being followed, perhaps silenced, and he inserted himself into the case as a witness to control the narrative, to expose enough to shake the tree without revealing too much. Watson leaned forward. But someone saw through that. Someone who wanted to ensure nothing from Vale's past, or Alain's, would ever reach daylight. Drelincourt nodded grimly. "Exactly. When Alain contacted me last week, he asked for protection, said he had written down names, dates, code words. He planned to submit them to you, Mr. Holmes. But before he could deliver anything, he vanished. Found murdered, throat slit, no papers." Holmes's voice was low. "And now Barstow has been attacked in his cell." Drelincourt looked visibly shaken at this. "Attacked? He's still alive?" "For now," Holmes said, "which means the game is not yet concluded." There was a brief silence, filled only by the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. "I need the names," Holmes said at last. "Alain may be gone, but his notes may yet exist." "Did he say where they were kept?" "Only that he had made arrangements. Insurance. He mentioned a locker at Euston Station, but nothing more specific." Holmes stood. "Then we must act swiftly. If someone else knows of this location, and I believe they do, it will not remain untouched for long." Drelincourt hesitated at the threshold. If you retrieve it, if this evidence points where I believe it does, there are men who will do anything to bury it again. You understand what you are involving yourself in? I understand perfectly, Holmes replied. But if we flinch at the first shadow cast by truth, we lose the right to call ourselves civilized. The morning fog had not lifted as we made our way to Euston Station. The air was thick with soot and steam from the outbound trains, and the smell of damp leather and coal smoke clung to every surface. Holmes moved with quiet urgency, his eyes darting to every porter and newsboy as if calculating probabilities with each glance. Inside the station, we approached the row of long-term lockers near the western platform. Holmes scanned the brass plates until he stopped before number 219. The lock was unremarkable, but Holmes withdrew a ring of picks from his coat and had it open in moments. Within was a single oilskin parcel, sealed with wax in 3 places. Holmes turned it once in his hands, then tucked it under his coat. Let us not tarry. But as we turned to leave, a commotion near the ticket booth drew our attention. A man had collapsed against the railing, clutching at his stomach. Blood spread rapidly across his vest, and cries of alarm rose from the nearby passengers. Holmes froze. That's not random. Come, Watson, quickly. We pushed through the crowd, but by the time we reached the injured man, he was already slumping to the ground. His eyes were glassy with pain. Holmes crouched beside him. Who did this? Speak if you can. The man coughed once, then whispered a single word. Ledger. Then he died. Watson checked for a pulse and shook his head grimly. Holmes stood, eyes scanning the thinning crowd. That man was no common traveler, his hands ink-stained, and his shoes were polished like a clerk's. He turned to me. We are being followed, watched. This was not an attack, it was a message. As we boarded a cab, Holmes was already cutting the seal on the oilskin parcel. Inside were several folded documents, ledger pages, typed notes, and a short letter addressed simply, "To the man who understands shadows." He read aloud. If this finds you, it means I failed to survive long enough to explain what I've pieced together. Vale was not acting alone. He was the mouthpiece of a larger concern, one that trades not in money but in leverage, secrets, shame. The names within this ledger are real. Protect it, use it, or burn it, but do not let them win. Below the note were 4 typed sheets, each covered in columns of dates, names, and cryptic annotations. MK, Geneva, Port Key, VL, Clarence House, receipts held. Holmes tucked the ledger into his coat. We must tread carefully now, Watson. With this, we hold the lever, but there are hands already reaching to snap it in 2. And as the cab rattled down the soot-lined streets, the mist trailing behind us like a drawn curtain, I could not shake the feeling that we had crossed into something vast, ancient, and perilous, where every truth uncovered came at a cost, and the witness who changed his name might only be the first stone in a long-forgotten graveyard. Holmes remained uncharacteristically silent during the entire journey back to Baker Street, his eyes fixed on the streets flickering past the cab's rain-slicked window, one hand clasped around the oilskin parcel like a priest guarding a sacred relic. The near-surgical precision of the attack at Euston, the dying man's whispered word, ledger, and the implication that the information within could shake unseen structures of power had cast a palpable weight over both of us. Only once we were safe inside and the door had been double-bolted did Holmes finally speak. "Watson," he said, gesturing toward the hearth, "make us tea." Strong. I fear the clarity we'll require in the hours ahead will not come easily. While I busied myself with the kettle, Holmes spread the documents from the parcel across the floor, arranging them in the order in which they had been folded. The oilskin wrapper, now opened flat, bore a number scrawled hastily in ink, 17 RM. Holmes stared at it for a long moment before moving on. The 4 ledger sheets were densely typed, Rows of what at first seemed innocuous. Dates, initials, cities, and brief remarks. But the further Holmes read, the more his brow furrowed and a low hum of concentration began to rise from him, a sound I'd long since come to associate with perilous revelations. "Look here," he said finally, motioning me over. "This column, Clarence House, January 89, VL present, documents sealed, witness secured." And again, 3 rows down. "Kensington Club, March 90, RD, conversation overheard, payment arranged." I knelt beside him. These are all meetings. More than that, transactions, exchanges, not of goods, but of knowledge, influence. Each one triangulates between place, name, and outcome. Observe the pattern. This is no casual log. It's a map of pressure points, a ledger of leverage. And Vale, Sir Cedric, is mentioned here. Indeed, repeatedly. But more interesting is the name not included. Holmes pointed to an empty space at the bottom of the final sheet. Here, a final entry. Delivery arranged. Confirmation by SD pending. And then nothing. Whoever was compiling this died before recording the name of the recipient. I suspect that entry was meant for me. There was a sharp knock at the door downstairs, followed by Mrs. Hudson's tentative voice. "Telegram for you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes opened the door before she could knock a second time and returned with the missive, tearing it open with a flick of his nail. His eyes moved quickly. "It's from Gregson," he said. "He's traced the insignia on the cufflink, the lion passant. It belongs to the Liscombe family, minor nobility in Suffolk. The crest is old, rarely used now. But a surviving son, Edwin Liscombe, resides in London, recently made trustee of several estates, one of which was Vale's." "Trustee?" I repeated. "You suspect a link between Vale and Liscombe?" "Not merely a link, a partnership, possibly a rivalry. Liscombe has wealth, but Vale had connections. Between them, the perfect apparatus for controlling information." He retrieved the carte de visite we'd received anonymously and compared it to the notes in the ledger. And yet, Liscombe's name does not appear anywhere. Curious. Either he is the spider at the center of the web, or he too was being manipulated. We wasted no time. Within the hour, we were in a hansom, rattling toward Grosvenor Square, where Edwin Liscombe kept residence in a 3-story townhouse whose severe facade belied the fortune behind it. The butler who received us was plainly uneasy upon hearing Holmes's name, but we were admitted nonetheless, and soon found ourselves in a drawing-room of marble and crimson velvet, every corner oozing that particular brand of understated English aristocracy, opulence made to look effortless. Liscombe entered with the self-assurance of a man who rarely heard the word no. He was tall, with hair receding into a widow's peak and eyes that flicked over us like one inspecting fruit at a market. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you honor me, though I confess I cannot imagine what business I might have with 2 such illustrious minds." "You knew Sir Cedric Vale," Holmes said without preamble, "and you were named his trustee. We are investigating the murder of a man who testified at the trial of Alfred Barstow, who killed Vale. The witness used an alias. His real name was Alain Merton. Liscombe didn't blink. I'm aware of the trial, and I attended Vale's funeral. We shared investments, nothing more." And yet, Holmes continued, producing the cufflink, "This was found in the murdered man's bed. It bears your family's crest." For the first time, something flickered behind Liscombe's eyes. Panic, quickly buried. Impossible. I haven't worn that design in years. It could have belonged to my father. Or perhaps was stolen. Holmes studied him. "You misunderstand. I'm not accusing you of murder. I'm asking what leverage Vale had over you." Liscombe's jaw tightened. "He was a vile man," he said finally, voice low. "He used what he knew to enrich himself. He had letters, mine, others. Harmless indiscretions, but dangerous if timed correctly. I paid to keep them quiet, as did many. Did Alain Merton contact you? Liscombe hesitated. Then, yes. 3 weeks ago, he said the game was over, that he was going to expose everything. I told him I had nothing left to hide, but I feared what others might do. You warned someone, Holmes said, and in doing so, you sealed his fate. Liscombe's hand trembled as he reached for a decanter. I didn't intend harm, but I made a call to a man named Rowntree. I believed he might scare Merton off. I didn't know he was murderous, Holmes finished coldly. Who is Rowntree? I asked. Liscombe gave a helpless shrug. A fixer, works quietly, answers to men above my level. I was told he could correct certain problems. Holmes stood abruptly. You've just named the next link in the chain, and I fear we are running out of time. As we stepped back into the fog-bound street, Holmes's energy had returned to its familiar electric sharpness. We must find Rowntree, he said, before he finds Barstow, and before the final piece of this puzzle, whoever orchestrated all of it, makes their move. And in that moment, I felt the strange, inevitable certainty that we were now racing against something far colder than justice. Something that had learned how to kill not just with knives, but with secrets. And that, in the days to come, even Holmes might be tested beyond reason. Holmes's pace quickened as we returned through the mist-laced streets of Mayfair, his coat billowing behind him, his entire form tense with urgency. He did not speak until we had turned the final corner into Baker Street, and even then it was not to me but to himself, murmuring barely audible fragments, names, places, dates, piecing the tangled skein of this mystery together in his mind, like a weaver threading a dying man's final testament into a broader tapestry. As soon as we were within the confines of our sitting room, Holmes pulled down his well-worn copy of Whitaker's Almanac and began rifling through its pages. I stood nearby, too restless to sit, waiting until he finally tapped the margin beside an entry. Rowntree, he said, eyes flashing. The name appeared in connection with a shadow firm, Bergen and Tallis, based out of Threadneedle Street, registered as legal advisors. In truth, they are little more than a clearinghouse for discreet settlements and quiet removals, a consulting firm for the unspoken acts of London's elite. Can we trace them? We can do more than that, Holmes replied. We can watch them. It was barely an hour later when Holmes, now garbed in the nondescript attire of a city clerk, stood with me outside the unmarked rear entrance of the Bergen and Tallis offices, nestled between a tobacconist and a shuttered tailor. The rain had started again, a fine mist that beaded on the brim of my hat and slicked the cobblestones in an oily sheen. Holmes lit a small clay pipe, cheap, unlike his usual Persian meerschaum, and leaned casually against a gas lamp post. The office closes in 10 minutes, he said softly. But Rowntree is not a clerk. He's a specialist. He'll come and go unseen. Observe the alley there to the right. It exits onto Cornhill. He'll use that route if he suspects surveillance. I nodded, my gaze shifting constantly, fingers twitching with the anticipation that comes in the final breaths before action. We didn't have long to wait. At precisely 10 minutes past the hour, a man emerged from the side door. He was slight, middle-aged, dressed in an overcoat tailored to anonymity. His shoulders were hunched, his pace brisk but not hurried, habitual stealth rather than present guilt. Holmes nudged me once, then we followed, our distance practiced, rhythm unobtrusive. Rowntree wove through the streets like a rat through a familiar tunnel. Down Bishopsgate, into Leadenhall Market, then around the back of Gracechurch Street. He paused only once, to light a match beneath the overhang of a closed draper's, and it was then that Holmes closed the gap. Mr. Rowntree, he said with the calm certainty of one who does not expect to be ignored. The man stiffened but did not turn. "Oh, you've mistaken me, sir." "I've mistaken nothing," Holmes replied, stepping into the light. You arranged the death of Alain Merton, and you failed to finish the same for Alfred Barstow. 2 failures. Perhaps your employer will find that inefficient." Rowntree turned then. His face was sharp, fox-like, his eyes small and unreadable. "You presume much." "I presume the truth," Holmes said. "And I know a cleaner when I see one." The man hesitated, then gave a dry, humorless smile. "You are not the only one who knows how to listen at keyholes, Mr. Holmes. There are forces at work that won't be deterred by a man with a magnifying glass and a clever tongue." "And yet they tremble at exposure," Holmes countered. "The ledger is no longer lost. I have it. I know what Alain Merton was trying to reveal, and I know it implicates more than Cedric Vale. Names you protect, names that sit in Parliament or behind it." For the first time, Rowntree's expression faltered. "You wouldn't survive long enough to say those names aloud." Holmes stepped closer. "Then, you had better listen carefully to the one name I will say. Gregson. As of this morning, Scotland Yard has been given a sealed envelope containing everything I've found. If anything happens to me or Dr. Watson, that envelope will be opened and read aloud to a room of reporters." Rowntree's jaw tightened, and I thought I saw something break in his mask. An old weariness, a knowledge that the tide had begun to turn against him. "You've overstepped, Holmes." "No," Holmes said softly. "You have. And now you have a choice. Disappear, or burn with the rest." Rowntree stared at him for a long moment, then without a word, turned and vanished into the night, as if swallowed by the fog itself. We returned to Baker Street in silence. Holmes remained at the window long after we arrived, pipe untouched, his gaze fixed not on the street, but on something inward, an equation not yet solved. It was past midnight when another knock sounded at the door. Gregson entered with the look of a man who had sprinted from Whitehall. "You've done it, Holmes," he said without waiting to sit. "Barstow woke up and confirmed everything. Merton had met him secretly before the trial, warned him that Vale was a marked man, told him to be careful. Barstow swears he tried to avoid the alley, but he was followed, provoked, forced to defend himself. We found a second blade at the scene, concealed under a drain plate. Standard military issue, foreign make. Matches the injury pattern." Holmes nodded. The true killer was there to eliminate Vale. Barstow simply got in the way. Barstow's being transferred to hospital under armed guard. Charges will be dropped within the week. "And Merton?" I asked quietly. Gregson shook his head. "We may never know his full story, but the Home Office has acknowledged unofficially that he did them a service once. They won't obstruct further investigation." After Gregson departed, Holmes stood silently for a long time, then reached into the fire grate and pulled out the tongs. With careful precision, he placed the ledger into the flames. It caught quickly, burning with a faint, acrid scent. I stood, startled. "Holmes, why?" He watched the fire as if it were an old enemy being cremated. "Because the ledger is a poison, Watson. It names the guilty, yes, but also the vulnerable. Those forced to compromise under threat. It is not justice to expose them all. It is vengeance, and I am not an executioner." I said nothing. He stared into the flames until the last page curled and blackened. Then he turned, voice quiet once more. "Alain Merton died to ensure the truth would survive. But truth, once found, must be judged by what good it can do, not merely by how loud it can be shouted." I nodded slowly, understanding then that we had not merely solved a murder, but preserved a balance more fragile than we could ever explain. And so, the case of the witness who changed his name was closed, not with the clang of courtroom verdicts, but with a whispered reckoning in the knowledge that the shadows of power are best dispelled not by torchlight, but by the steady patience of watchful men. The days that followed the destruction of the ledger were quiet in a manner that unsettled me deeply. The city seemed to hold its breath. The usual murmur of London streets dampened as if the very fog conspired to conceal truths still too dangerous for daylight. Holmes, however, remained as restless as ever, pacing the sitting room with his habitual energy tempered by a weight I had seldom seen before. On the fourth morning after Rowntree's flight, a letter arrived addressed in a fine copper-plate hand. Holmes took the envelope without a word and slit it open with his customary precision. The paper inside was thick, heavy, and bore no postmark. The message was brief. The game is not over. Liscombe moves at dusk. Watch closely. A friend. Holmes folded the note carefully and regarded me with a keen look. Watson, it appears our adversaries still hold cards we have not yet glimpsed. Edwin Liscombe will act tonight. We must be prepared. As dusk fell, we took our places across the street from Liscombe's townhouse. The gas lamps flickered with a yellow pallor, casting long, quivering shadows against the brick walls. The street was unusually silent save for the soft clip-clop of a horse's hooves approaching. Holmes adjusted his scarf and whispered, "Observe the door, Watson." A visitor arrives. Moments later, a carriage rolled to a stop. A tall figure in a dark cloak stepped out, moving with the assured gait of one accustomed to command. Holmes's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "It is Liscombe himself," he murmured, "and he is not alone." The visitor was followed by a second man, shorter, with a hawkish nose and sharp eyes. The two exchanged brief words before entering the house. We watched as Liscombe produced a key and slipped inside. Holmes consulted his pocket watch. "Timing is crucial. We must enter soon after." We waited until the carriage returned, carrying only the shorter man. Holmes and I crossed swiftly and rang the doorbell. After a moment, the butler answered, surprise flickering across his face at our presence. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is most irregular," he said, but allowed us entry without protest. Inside, the house was cloaked in shadows. Holmes moved silently up the grand staircase, with me close behind. The second-floor landing led to a study where the scent of pipe tobacco lingered faintly. The door was ajar. Holmes pushed it open, revealing Liscombe seated behind a heavy oak desk, his expression grim, fingers steepled. "I expected you," Liscombe said, voice cold. Holmes inclined his head. "We came to prevent bloodshed." Liscombe smiled thinly. "Blood has already been shed. You must understand, Holmes, this game is far older than you imagine. The ledger, the murders, Barstow's conviction, they are mere symptoms of a larger illness." He motioned toward the room's corner, where a small box sat atop a pedestal. Holmes's gaze flicked there immediately. "What is that?" Holmes demanded. "A device," Liscombe replied. "A voice recorder of sorts, though primitive. It contains evidence that would destroy not only reputations, but the very fabric of government." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And you guard it?" "Because it is a poison, Holmes. Like the ledger, it must not fall into the wrong hands." Holmes stepped closer. "But it must not be hidden either. Justice demands transparency." Liscombe rose, his stature imposing. "You mistake my intentions. I seek order, not chaos. Exposing all would plunge the country into ruin." A sudden noise interrupted us, a creak from the doorway. We turned to see the hawkish man from earlier entering, his face twisted in anger. "Liscombe, you invited them?" he spat. Liscombe's reply was calm. "They have earned their place at the table." The man advanced. "Then so be it. The time for secrets is over. Let us see if Holmes truly understands the game he has entered." A struggle ensued. Holmes and I moved instinctively, parrying blows and grappling with our assailant. Liscombe darted toward the pedestal, grasping the box and clutching it tightly. Amidst the chaos, I caught Holmes's eye. His expression was resolute. "Secure the box, Liscombe," Holmes commanded. Liscombe nodded, retreating toward a side exit with the device. Our attacker, realizing he was outmatched, cursed and fled into the night. We were left breathless, the tension thick in the room. Holmes turned to Liscombe. "You must come with us. This ends now." Liscombe hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the night air was sharp, carrying the distant sound of church bells. We made our way swiftly back to Baker Street, the box heavy in Liscombe's hands. Once inside, Holmes carefully examined the device. "It is a marvel of secrecy," he murmured. "If the contents are what Liscombe fears, then we hold the key to dismantling this entire network." He set the box gently on the table and began to prepare it for playback. As the faint mechanical clicks filled the room, a voice began to speak, a voice dripping with menace and authority. "It is not enough to silence a single man," it said. "We must control the narrative. Bend truth to our will." The recording went on, revealing conversations implicating men far above Liscombe and Vale in schemes of manipulation and deceit. Holmes listened, his face pale but determined. "Watson, this is no longer merely a murder case. It is a revelation that threatens the very pillars of power." I felt a chill run down my spine. Holmes's voice broke the silence. "We must decide, expose this and risk chaos, or guard it and perpetuate corruption." For a moment, the weight of centuries of conspiracy settled upon us. Then Holmes looked at me with unwavering resolve. "We choose truth." The recording continued, and the night deepened around us as the shadows of London's secrets began to unravel. The dawn crept slowly over London, the pallid light seeping through the heavy drapes of our sitting room as Holmes and I sat in contemplative silence. The mechanical ticking of the ancient recorder had ceased, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with the residue of whispered treachery and cold calculation. The voices we had heard, speaking from the past, had unveiled a network so vast and insidious that the very foundations of government seemed to tremble beneath their weight. Holmes finally broke the silence. "This recording, Watson, is a Pandora's box wrapped in velvet. The men named within wield power beyond the reach of law or conscience. Yet here we hold their own words. Proof. Solid, undeniable proof." I nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of the decision before us. But what then? If we reveal this, the shock waves could cripple the empire. Innocents may suffer alongside the guilty. Holmes's eyes glimmered with their usual sharpness. "Truth is a lantern, Watson. It may blind as much as it reveals, but without it, darkness rules unchecked." Before we could further debate, a sharp rap came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, pale and breathless. "Inspector Gregson, Mr. Holmes. He insists it's urgent." Within moments, Gregson was ushered in, his face marked by exhaustion and resolve. "I've secured a safe location for the documents and recording," he announced. "But there's more. We intercepted a letter addressed to Liscombe's house, marked with the same wax seal found on the ledger. It warns of an imminent attempt to destroy evidence and silence anyone connected." Holmes's jaw tightened. "Our enemies grow desperate." Gregson placed a bundle of papers on the table. "And these. Correspondence between Vale and a certain Parliament member. Details of bribes, cover-ups, and veiled threats. The rot runs deep." Holmes studied the papers. "With this, we can begin to unravel the conspiracy, thread by thread. But first, we must protect those willing to speak." The next days passed in a whirlwind. Liscombe agreed to cooperate fully, revealing details of covert meetings and names previously unknown to us. Barstow's charges were formally dropped, and he was moved to a secure hospital under guard. Holmes and I coordinated with Gregson and trusted allies to safeguard witnesses and compile evidence. The press, hungry for scandal, was kept at bay by a delicate dance of misinformation and discreet warnings. Yet, as the network's edges frayed, shadows gathered. One night, as Holmes and I returned from a meeting with Liscombe, we found our lodgings ransacked. Papers scattered, drawers emptied, and an unmistakable warning scrawled upon the wall. Cease or perish. Holmes's face was grim. They are closing in. We doubled our efforts, moving documents to secret locations, arranging coded messages, and employing trusted couriers. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. A cabal of officials, financiers, and aristocrats manipulating policies and suppressing dissent through fear and bribery. Holmes prepared a formal report destined for the highest levels of government and select members of the press, but he insisted on caution. Exposing such a beast requires precision, he explained. Too sudden a blow, and it may strike back harder, destroying evidence and lives. Our patience was tested when another attempt was made on Barstow's life, thwarted only by the vigilance of his guards. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a glimmer of hope appeared. Several minor officials, once complicit, approached us with confessions and documents, swayed by Liscombe's testimony and the mounting evidence. In the final days, Holmes orchestrated a series of public disclosures, carefully timed to coincide with parliamentary inquiries and press exposés. The revelations rocked London, forcing resignations, arrests, and reforms. As the city stirred to a new dawn, Holmes and I sat once more by our fire. He was quieter than usual, the usual spark tempered by the knowledge that justice, while served, was a fragile thing. "Watson," he said softly. "The witness who changed his name did more than testify. He altered the course of many lives, and those shadows still linger. Light has found its way in." I raised my glass. "To Alain Merton," Holmes smiled faintly, "and to those who bear the burden of truth, no matter the cost." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing a London uncertain but unbowed, ready to face the morrow with eyes unclouded, thanks to the quiet labors of a witness, a detective, and a steadfast friend. The weeks following the public disclosures unfolded in a manner both predictable and unsettling. London awoke to a storm of indictments and resignations, newspapers ablaze with the names and deeds that had once lurked in shadows. Parliament convened special sessions, promising reform and renewed vigilance. Yet beneath this upheaval, an uneasy silence spread, a tacit acknowledgement that the roots of corruption ran deep and that the battle for justice was far from over. Holmes and I watched these developments closely from our Baker Street refuge. The man who once called himself Alain Merton had, through his sacrifice, shifted the scales, but we both knew that in the game of power, no victory was final. One evening, as the gas lights flickered through a soft mist, Holmes sat at his desk, hands folded, eyes distant. I broke the silence. "Do you think this will last? The reforms, the arrests, or will the shadows merely retreat to strike another day?" Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The truth, Watson, is like a candle flame in the wind. It requires tending. The moment we grow complacent, darkness creeps back." Before I could reply, there came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a letter, sealed with a familiar emblem, the lion passant. Holmes broke the seal and read the brief note. "Dear Mr. Holmes, your efforts have not gone unnoticed. I'm Edwin Liscombe. I write to express my gratitude and to warn you that while many have been exposed, there are still those who move unseen. Be vigilant. Yours sincerely, E.L. Holmes," folded the note thoughtfully. This confirms what I suspected. Liscombe remains cautious, which means the threat lingers. Days later, we received word that Liscombe had relocated, vanishing from his previous address. Our inquiries revealed he had assumed a new identity and left London for the countryside, a prudent move given the dangers. Meanwhile, Barstow's acquittal was formalized, but his health remained fragile. He confided in me one afternoon that the ordeal had left scars beyond the physical. "I owe my life to you and Mr. Holmes," he said quietly. But I fear many like me will continue to suffer as long as these shadows exist." Holmes nodded gravely. "Then it falls to men like us to keep the light burning." Our routine was disrupted one chill morning when a package arrived, unmarked but unmistakably familiar. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Holmes examined it carefully. "This appears to be Merton's personal account," he said. "His thoughts, observations, and perhaps the key to understanding the full scope." As we read, the journal revealed not only Merton's espionage work, but also his growing doubts and fears about the network he had uncovered. He wrote of attempts on his life, coded messages, and an urgent desire to set things right before it was too late. The final entry was a cryptic line: "The witness who changed his name is no longer alone." The truth has allies in unexpected places. That evening, Holmes and I sat in contemplation, aware that the case was closing, yet sensing that the story was far from complete. Justice, Holmes mused, is a journey, not a destination, and in London, the path is never straight. As the city settled into night, I reflected on the intricate dance we had witnessed. A dance of names changed, lives lost, and secrets revealed. The witness who had altered his identity had indeed changed the course of many lives, including our own. And as Holmes prepared for his next case, I knew that our partnership would continue to navigate the labyrinth of truth, light, and shadow, forever entwined in the mysteries that only London could provide. The following days were marked by a peculiar stillness, as if London itself paused to catch its breath after the tempest unleashed by the revelations. The city's usual cacophony, horses' hooves, street vendors, the distant whistles of trains, persisted, but beneath it all was a subtle undercurrent of unease, an unspoken acknowledgement that while justice had claimed a victory, the struggle was far from over. Holmes, as always, seemed to find solace in the quiet routine of his deductions. Yet I observed in him a shadowed reserve, a recognition that the game we had played was only one chapter in a much larger, more dangerous tome. He spent hours poring over Merton's journal, cross-referencing entries with the names and events we had uncovered, tracing faint lines that connected the players in this deadly drama. One afternoon, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Holmes looked up from the pages with a flicker of that rare excitement. "Watson," he said, "the final entry in Merton's journal hints at something we have yet to fully grasp. Allies in unexpected places. We have uncovered enemies aplenty, but allies. They may be the key to securing lasting change." Just then, a discreet knock heralded the arrival of Gregson, who entered bearing a small parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. "Holmes," he said, "we received this from an anonymous source. It was left at the yard with instructions that it be delivered to you without delay." Holmes unwrapped the parcel carefully, revealing a series of photographs and letters. The images were candid shots of men and women, some familiar, others obscure, all engaged in private moments, meetings, handshakes, exchanges of documents. "These are the allies," Holmes murmured, spreading the photographs on the table. "Quiet guardians of truth operating beneath the radar, whose courage ensures that shadows do not prevail." Among the letters was one penned in a delicate hand, inviting Holmes and myself to a discreet gathering at a private club in Mayfair. The letter promised conversation, collaboration, and a chance to fortify the fragile web of resistance that had begun to form. That evening, under the guise of twilight, we found ourselves in a richly paneled room filled with a small but diverse assembly. Journalists, former diplomats, reform-minded politicians, and even a few retired officers. The atmosphere was charged with a shared purpose, a determination to continue the fight begun by a man who had dared to change his name to shield the truth. Holmes spoke briefly, but with profound clarity, outlining the events that had brought us here and the need for discretion balanced with decisive action. As the meeting adjourned, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Despite the darkness we had faced, the spark of resistance had been kindled, and with it, the promise that justice might one day be more than a fleeting victory. Back at Baker Street, as the night deepened, Holmes and I sat by the fire, the city's distant lights twinkling like stars through the fog. "Watson," he said softly, "the case of the witness who changed his name is concluded, but its legacy will endure. It reminds us that truth often demands sacrifice, and that heroes come in many forms, sometimes in the guise of a man who must become a ghost to be heard." I raised my glass in silent toast, and so we await the next shadow to pierce the light. Holmes smiled faintly, his gaze distant but resolute. "For as long as London breathes, Watson, there will be mysteries to solve, and men to solve them." And with that, the city settled into its nocturnal rhythm, and the enduring partnership of detective and chronicler prepared for whatever secrets the coming dawn might reveal. The candle flickered low in the quiet of Baker Street as I sat beside Holmes, both of us lost in thought. The events of recent weeks had left a lingering impression, proof that beneath London's fog and veneer of civility lay a labyrinth of shadowed dealings and whispered secrets. Yet it was equally clear that even within those shadows, light found willing champions. Holmes was unusually pensive that night, his gaze fixed on the flickering flame as though it held the answers to some inscrutable puzzle. Finally, he broke the silence. "Watson, the case of Alain Merton, the witness who changed his name, has taught me more than I anticipated. It revealed how fragile justice is, how easily it may be bent or concealed by those who wield power without conscience." I nodded. Yet through it all, truth prevailed. Yes, but only because of those willing to sacrifice, to step into the shadows themselves. He paused, then turned toward me. "There are still unanswered questions, alliances formed in secret, motives buried beneath layers of deceit. Our work is never truly done." Before I could reply, a faint rap echoed through the hall. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a slender envelope. Holmes took it, noting the unfamiliar seal. Opening it carefully, he read aloud a brief message. "A new thread has appeared, Watson. The game is afoot once more." His eyes gleamed with that unmistakable spark of anticipation. "Prepare yourself, my friend," he said, rising and donning his coat. "London awaits us." And so, as dawn cast pale light over the city's ancient spires, we stepped once more into the intricate dance of mystery and revelation, bound by the conviction that no shadow is so deep as to escape the light of a steadfast mind. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the gaslit streets of London as Holmes and I emerged from our quarters, the chill air invigorating despite the early hour. The letter from the previous evening, brief and cryptic, had set our course. A new thread had indeed appeared, promising a mystery no less complex and dangerous than the last. We made our way to the offices of the Times, where a young reporter named Miss Beatrice Langley awaited our arrival. She was an intelligent woman of uncommon discretion, entrusted with information too sensitive for the common press. Her eyes held a determined glint as she greeted us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began without preamble, "what I have to share may put us all at risk, but the truth must come to light." She handed us a bundle of documents. Letters, coded telegrams, and newspaper clippings that hinted at a clandestine society operating beneath the surface of London's elite circles. Whispers of influence, bribery, and shadow politics permeated the pages, names that connected to some we had encountered before. Holmes examined the material carefully, his brow furrowing. "A network within a network," he mused. "Layers of concealment so thick they nearly defy detection." Miss Langley nodded. "They call themselves the Ecliptic Circle. Their members are drawn from government, finance, and even law enforcement. They manipulate events to serve their own ends." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And you have evidence?" "Enough to spark inquiry," she replied. "But we need your expertise to navigate their labyrinth and expose their influence." The three of us began a painstaking investigation, tracing financial transactions, intercepting coded communications, and interviewing reluctant witnesses. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle that revealed an organization far more insidious than mere corruption, a calculated erosion of trust and justice. As days passed, the danger became palpable. Threatening letters were delivered, our movements shadowed by unseen watchers. Yet Holmes's resolve never wavered. One evening, as fog swallowed the city, we followed a lead to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Hampstead. Inside, amid faded grandeur, we uncovered a trove of documents confirming the Ecliptic Circle's role in several recent scandals, including the one involving Alan Merton. The evidence was irrefutable, but perilous. To publish it was to invite wrath. To suppress it was to betray the very principles we upheld. Holmes turned to me, eyes blazing with conviction. "We stand at the precipice, Watson. To step forward is to risk everything, but inaction is a concession to darkness." Together with Miss Langley, we crafted a plan to release the information strategically, through trusted channels and with legal safeguards. The ensuing revelations rocked the foundations of power, yet again igniting public outrage and calls for reform. In the aftermath, as London began to heal and rebuild, Holmes and I reflected on the journey. The witness who changed his name had set in motion a chain of events that transcended his own sacrifice, illuminating the intricate dance between shadow and light. Holmes's parting words lingered in my mind. "In the pursuit of truth, we are but guardians, ever vigilant, knowing that each victory is but a moment in an endless struggle." And as the city's heartbeat resumed its steady rhythm, we prepared for whatever mysteries awaited us beyond the veil of fog and intrigue. The long London night deepened as Holmes and I returned once more to our Baker Street sanctuary, the city's restless pulse echoing faintly beyond the windows. The revelations brought forth by Miss Langley's courageous exposé had set alight the fragile web of the Ecliptic Circle, igniting a cascade of resignations, inquiries, and public reckoning. Yet beneath the surface, the shadows remained, shifting, retreating, ever watchful. Holmes sat quietly by the fire, hands clasped, eyes distant but sharp. I felt the weight of all that had transpired, the sacrifices, the half-truths, the triumphs and the costs. The witness who changed his name had not merely altered one case. He had begun a movement that tested the very soul of justice. At last, Holmes spoke, his voice low and resolute. "Watson, all the threads we have followed lead back to one root, power wielded without accountability. We uncovered much, but the true revelation lies not only in names and deeds, but in the courage to face them." He stood and retrieved from his desk a folded, worn piece of paper, the final entry from Alan Merton's journal. He wrote, "The truth is a burden borne by few, but a beacon for many. It is this beacon we must carry forward." A soft knock interrupted us, and Mrs. Hudson entered with a visitor's card, an invitation, unsigned but unmistakably elegant. Holmes regarded it thoughtfully. A summons from a source unknown, perhaps an opportunity or a challenge. But one certainty remains: our work endures. I rose, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then together, as always, we shall meet it." And so, as the gaslights flickered and the London fog curled like whispered secrets around the streets below, Holmes and I prepared to step once more into the labyrinth, our minds keen, our resolve unbroken, ever watchful for the next shadow to pierce the light. The case of the witness who changed his name had closed, but its legacy had opened doors to mysteries yet unsolved. And in the eternal dance of deduction, the game was forever afoot.